this is my first jump, 2 years, and I'm going to hit trees. So I know I'm going to be dead. So I get all set up. I actually could feel myself going through the branches, hitting the branches. I'm still going. And then all of a sudden, nothing. I'm just sitting there. Now I'm down in these trees, and it's so dark I can't even see the ground. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I can hear somebody yelling. And it's a guy, broken leg. Out of the 12 guys that jumped, I was the only one that walked off the drop zone.
Curious Humanography is proud to partner with Utah Honor Flight, part of the National Honor Flight Network, giving veterans the trip of a lifetime to Washington, D.C. to visit memorials built in their honor. Each flight is free for veterans and made possible by generous donors. To learn more or support their mission, visit utahhonorflight.org and find your local Honor Flight hub at www.honorflight.org. Also, if you'd like to see more stories like this, please support us by subscribing to our channel, liking, commenting on the video, and sharing it with your friends. Your support helps us continue to bring stories that deserve to be heard. Thank you for watching, and now back to our show.
Okay, the name is Rawland Lemons. I got the middle initial A, but I don't ever use that for anything. I was born in Cedar City, Utah, 1947, and my brother was born 2 years before me to the day. So he was born August the 19th, 1945. And we always used to give my mom a bad time about that was the only way that she could have 2 kids and only have to bake 1 cake a year. But we lived in a little town, Hurricane, down there and most of this I don't remember. I'm just telling you what I've heard. We lived there for a couple of years. Then we moved out to California. My dad got recalled for Korea.
He was in the Army, or?
Well, he was in the Navy, but he was a Marine Corps corpsman. So he was with the 1st Marine Division in World War II. And then after that, we moved. My dad got offered a job at Hill Air Force Base, so we moved up. Lived in Ogden till I was in about the 4th grade. Then we moved out to Clearfield. My dad bought a house out there, and we moved into Clearfield and lived there ever since. We lived there. I graduated from high school, went into the military, came back, and my mom still had the original house. My father passed away when I was a sophomore in high school. And so my mom was living there, and she was remarried, and so she had this house, and so she asked my brother if he wanted to buy it. Well, he was a Marine Corps sergeant, and he didn't want to be tied down to a house. So he said no. So she asked me if I wanted it, and so I bought it. And then we lived there for like 5 or 6 years. Then we had 2 kids, and we had a Fairbairn on its way, and it was a 3-bedroom house. 3-bedroom house, so it was almost didn't have enough room. So we moved 1 block north and 2 miles west and bought a house in Clinton.
And that's where you live now?
Yeah, and we've lived there for 54 years. Yeah.
Let's tell me your stories, your involvement with the military. Let's just start right there when you were in high school.
Well, when I was still in high school, senior in high school, I heard that they were going to hire some people up to Hillfield. So I went to my counselor, walked out of high school and walked up to the base, or I drove up to the base, and they gave me an application. So I filled it out, turned it in. This was about maybe 3 months before graduation, and about a month and a half.
65.
Yeah, I graduated in 65. Yeah.
Okay.
So about 2 months later, I get a call, and it says, "We want you to come up to Hillfield for an interview." I said, okay. So I drove up to Hillfield again and went in there, and this guy interviewed me for it. And he says, well, okay, we will hire you. Can you come to work next week? And I says, no, I can't. I says, I got to graduate from high school still. And he got up and left and brought his supervisor back, and his supervisor says, hey, you're in a lot of trouble. I said, what for? And he says, you lied on your government application. And I says, where did I lie? And he says, right here. And he pointed down at the application where it had, when did you graduate from high school? Well, I had put down a date that was 3 months in advance, because that's when I was going to graduate. And he looked at it, and he started laughing, and he turned to the guy, and he says, well, he didn't lie. He says, that date hasn't shown up yet, but he didn't lie. So he says, if you want to hire him, you can. Just you got to wait until he graduates to hire him. So they did. They hired me, and then I stuck around for the next 2 or 3 weeks until I graduated. So I always joke that I actually had a job at Hillfield before I graduated from high school.
And what was your job at Hillfield? What'd you do?
At that time, it was I worked in a hydraulic unit. I was building the hydraulic pump that went on the nose of the airplane, on the nose of the engine. It would take in hydraulic fluid at 300 pounds pressure and put it out at, and I don't know the exact numbers, but would put it out at 3,000 pounds pressure.
Was this the F4 at that time, or what plane was it?
Yeah, it was the F4.
Tell me about the F4.
An interesting side note is that my dad, when he was, I would have been a freshman in high school then, he was called on TDY to go down to Florida, I can't remember now. What the Air Force base was.
St. Petersburg?
Yeah, there was an Air Force. The Navy had the F4, but the Air Force didn't. And they were getting ready to transition it over to the Air Force. And my dad was one of the equipment specialists on it. So he went down there I think we spent 3 months down there. And then he came back. And I was working there as a hydraulic person. Then I'd worked there for about 3 months, maybe 4 months. And I decided, I got to go to school. So I quit my job, went into Weber State College. And at that time, it was a college, not a university.
Yeah.
And so I went into there, and I was there for about almost my freshman year. And at the end of the freshman year, I had basically only accomplished getting a whole bunch of classes that didn't matter. They were just electives and stuff like that. Right. So I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. So I thought, well, I'll go back to work again. And so I went back. So I quit.
And at this point, the draft has started?
I don't think the lottery had started, but the draft had started.
Okay.
And but I had the student deferment.
Okay.
But then I went out and I went back to Hillfield to work, and so that deferment went away. And I'd worked out to Hillfield, and when I was working out there, I took a bunch of some schools when we first hired in, and then they selected me to be I still can't think of the word for it. Anyway, to become it's an apprenticeship type. It's 2.5 years long, and I would come out as, for those that know, it's a wage grade 10. It's just one of their levels.
Right.
And they'd send me to a bunch of schools.
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I started that. I worked there for about, I want to say 3 or 4 months, something like that. I'm getting old, so I don't know the times.
Yeah, it's okay.
Everything was yesterday. So a guy came up to me and he says, hey, there's a place down here in Layton that's trying to get people to join. It's a National Guard unit. So I went down there.
What was appealing about that for you at the time?
Well, I knew I was going to get drafted. So I thought, go check this out and see what they're talking about. And he says, it's a really fun unit to get into. I said, okay. So I went down there. And, I jokingly, I was, 19 years old, 18, 19 years old. And they says, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to take you back and we're going to send you to this school where you get to shoot all these guns. You get to blow up all kinds of stuff. We're going to take you, put you in an airplane. The airplane will take off. We'll go up to 1,500 feet, and then we'll toss you out. And then we'll do that as many times as you want. It won't cost you anything. You can learn how to skydive. And I thought, I'm 19. I'm invincible. Nothing can hurt me. So I said, well, that sounds like fun. I'll do that, And so I joined, and they signed me up right then. And then I came back to Hillfield and told them, and they says, well, you're in this school, this program, but that's okay because you'll only be gone for a couple of months. Then as soon as you get back, just come back up here and we'll hire you. You won't even be hired. You'll still be in, working at Hillfield, and we'll put you right back to work.
Because they have to keep your job.
Yeah, they had to keep my job open because I was in the military.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. So that even sounded better. So I joined, hung around for another, I don't know what it was, another couple of months or so. Then they sent me back to, I said, okay, you're now going to go back on active duty. And I went from here to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
What was that like?
Yeah, that was my first introduction to really military.
Tell me about that.
You know, there was about probably close to 100 of us that were in this one group that were all going to go from there to our next assignment. And so all we had to do was get all of our uniforms issued. We had to get our shots. We had to get this. And that was another thing that happened. This colonel got up in front. He's talking to about 100, maybe 200 guys in this big formation. And he says, now, I'm going to tell you something. He says, I'm going to make sure I explain it very carefully. But he says, watch, somebody is still going to ask a dumb question. He says, you need to get shots. You need to get like 8 shots to go in. He says, I don't care if you've got a letter from your mother telling me that you've had these shots. He says, I know your mother won't lie, but you're still going to get them. I don't care if you've got a doctor's certificate signed by a doctor that says that you're going to get these shots. You know, you're still going to get them. I don't care if he's given them to you yesterday. You're going to get them. He says, there's one piece of paper that I will accept so that you don't have to get shots. And he says, nobody's got that. I know, nobody's got it. Now, he says, now remember what I told you, one guy? Now watch this. Does anybody have any questions? And I'm sitting back there and I said, oh, geez. So I raised my hand. Get up here. Who are you? Private Lemons. He says, what do you ask? And I says, well, I've had those shots before. And he says, what did I tell you? And I says, well, you told me that I had to have a certain paper. And he says, yeah. And I reached in my back pocket and pulled it out and handed him this little booklet. Had about 10 pages in it. He looked at it. He goes, where'd you get this? And I said, well, I used to work as a civilian for the Air Force. And he flipped through it. And he says, held it up. And he says, this is the only thing that I can accept. It's by a military thing. You have to have 2 shots. That's the only 2 that I lacked. And they were boosters. And so he just sat there and we just laughed, you know. He gave it to me, gave me my 2 shots, and we went on about our work, you know. Then we went from there, after everybody else had processed in, we went down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And when we got there, it was late in the fall, and they had this great big open field. Now, this is where they're building up for Vietnam and doing all kinds of stuff and everything. For our basic training, they assigned us the old Army 10-man tents, or I think they were 12-man tents, but they would assign, that's where we slept, a cot, a sleeping bag, 2 blankets, and you're there. And so we started our basic training down there. And there's another one there. I got to quit learning, not raise my hand so often. We're in a formation, 400 people roughly in the formation. Lieutenant Colonel gets up there in front, and he says, now remember when you all came in there and we told you that for the first, I think it was 4 weeks or 6 weeks of basic training, you're not going to get any mail at all. He says, so we all had to send a card out, a postcard to our parents or whoever, telling them not to send any mail. He says, if we get mail, we're just going to hold it up in the office until that 6 weeks is up. He says, if they need to get in touch with you, go to the American Red Cross and they'll get in touch with you if it's an emergency, a death or something. And so this is on about the third week of basic or so. He sat there, he says, now, does everybody remember me telling you that? Everybody's, yeah, we all remember that. He said, okay. And he held up this letter and he says, where's Private Lemons? And I raised my hand. Get up here. So he was up on a big stand. So I ran up the stairs, reported to him, and he says, I can't believe I've never had one of these happen before. Here's a letter. I have to give it to you. And so I gave it to him, and he says, who's it from? And I says, Department of Defense, United States Air Force. And he says, yeah, it's Department of Defense. I have to deliver those. I can't, there's no reason. And so I took it and was folding it up to put it in my pocket. He said, oh no, we've all had to sit here and listen. What's the letter say? So I opened it up, I read it. I said, okay. And so I started to, he said, no, read it out loud to everybody. I'm paraphrasing. It says, well, the United States Air Force Reserve Unit, the 419th, stationed at Hillfield, has offered me a position with them so I can join the Air Force Reserve. And he says, and what's your reply? And I says, well, I'm going to send him back a note that says, very respectfully, I appreciate the offer, but I've had a better offer. I'm joining the Army. And he says, perfect answer. And so I had to turn that one down.
How was your drill sergeants? What was that like?
Well, when we were at Fort Bragg, all of our drill instructors, everybody that was doing it wasn't a regular cadre for basic training and all that. We were assigned with the 7th Special Forces Group. The 7th Special Forces Group was the group that was stationed in Utah, in the United States at Fort Bragg. The 7th Special Forces Group, the 5th Special Forces Group was stationed in Vietnam. So when they needed people from the 5th, either wounded or just their time was up and they were coming back, then they'd take somebody or a group or whatever from the 7th and send them over. So it was a rotational. So the people that were coming back were coming right out of Vietnam. And then most of them were our cadre. So all of our, they were tough, but they'd always explain to you, the reason we're teaching you this is because when you go to Vietnam, you need to know how to do this. And this is the instruction for keeping you physically fit and all that kind of stuff. So it was really good because you could see an immediate application. A lot of times in basic, do 50 push-ups. Why? Because I said so. And here they're do 50 push-ups. Why? Because I want you strong enough that you can rappel down a mountain or something like that.
Yeah.
And you may have to do that, or you may have to lug this around and all that.
Would they tell stories of what happened over there, or were they pretty quiet about stuff?
They, for the most part, were kind of quiet about what happened to them personally, unless they could relate it to something that, you need to know this because when I was in Vietnam, this other guy knew that, and he saved my life. They'd relate it to an actual incident. Or
right.
Because I knew this, I could save this other guy's life, or I could set up this booby trap or whatever. So,
was that the camp you met the guy that had been over there in Vietnam 3 times?
Yeah.
Tell me that story.
He was our platoon sergeant, the cadre over it. He was over our platoon. And when I met him, now this is in late 65, he told me that he had been in Vietnam 3 times on 3 different tours before 65. And I asked him, when did you go? When was your first tour? And he says, my first tour was in 1955. And I said, I didn't know I had anybody in 55. And he says, well, I relieved somebody. So there was somebody there before him. And he says, and then he came back and he went to a bunch of schools, and then they sent him back. He was back in and I think they were year tours. I'm not sure, they could have been longer because at that time there was no set tours. And he says, and then I came back and was back here for about 2 years and doing some more schooling. Had to get some more upgrades on schooling because a lot of the arms and ammunition and rockets and all that were progressing so fast. And he says, and so I got up on that. And then he says, and then I went back. And he says, and then when I came back to the United States, they assigned me back to Fort Bragg. And he says, and I'm here teaching you guys, so I don't have to go again. You're going to go over for me. And we all just laughed, but he was really good. He was very, you always hear people talking about your drill sergeants and all that, and he would, he'd scare you to death. But he would always, after something was done, he'd sit down and would just sit there and talk like, just best friends. Even during training, he'd talk to us. Then he'd stand up, and as soon as he stood up and walked in front of that platoon, you knew That's the guy. And you didn't argue with him. And
Now, how long were you in Bragg? How long were you there?
well, I was on active duty for a little over 9 months, almost 10 months.
And you became a Green Beret there?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, like I say, we were being trained by the Special Forces group, and that was our whole thing. So we spent 8 weeks in basic training. Then we did, if I got it straight, we did about 4 weeks of AIT, which is Advanced Individual Training. Then they sent us up to Fort Benning, Georgia, to learn how to jump out of those perfectly good airplanes. And that was another one that we were up out on the runway. We were all sitting down on the runway, and they were bringing these C-119s, which is old called flying boxcar, and they had some C-130s up there. And this one pilot was just walking down between rows of all of us sitting on the ground. He's just shaking his head, and he looked over and he says, and he happened to stop in front of our group that was there. There was about 5 or 6 of us, and he says, "I can't believe you guys would jump out of a perfectly good airplane." And I looked at him and said, "Sir?" And he says, "Yeah." And I says, "Before I came in the Army, I worked at an Air Force base as a civilian. My job was to repair airplanes. None of them are perfectly good." He looked at me kind of funny, and his co-pilot just cracked up laughing, and he said, "That's the first time everybody stopped him from telling a joke." So anyway, we ended up there. 1 week was what they call ground week. So all they do is just sit, tons of physical training. You do practice just rolling on the ground, anything to do with it, but you have to be on the ground. And then the second week, as they called it, tower week, but they had one tower that you could go up, and they'd hook you up to a parachute. Then they'd inflate it and take you up. And somebody once, they told me that was actually an amusement ride. It used to be at one of the world fairs that were being conducted. And then when they got done at that World's Fair, the Army bought it and brought it back down. And they'd take you up, and then there was 4 positions up there on the top, and then they'd release them, and then you'd float down. So you wasn't falling very far. It just got you used to the sensation, not the opening shock, but just all the sensation. Then they had some that were 30 foot off the ground, and you would hook up those with a big cable, and you'd jump out, and it'd give you the jolt as though you were jumping out. And then you'd slide down the cable, and they'd release you and send you back up to do it a few more times. And then they'd put you up on a 6-foot platform and all these different platforms, and that was called the Tower Week, and you do all these practices on it. And then the last week was the actual jump week, and that's when they'd take you out, give you the chute, take you up.
Describe that, being on a plane. What was that like? Tell me about that.
Well, it was. I always enjoyed it. I mean, I like to fly, and so I really wasn't that concerned about it. Some guys, they'd get on that plane and sit down, they'd start the engines up, and those guys would close their eyes, and they'd open them again just as they were going out the door. But I kind of liked it. You know, it was enjoyable for me. You know, they did have people that would get up and go through that whole thing and get up, and they had a great big huge guy. At least for me, looked awful huge. And he would be standing there as the jump master. And he would, if you went up to the door, you stand in the door and then he would hit you on the back, or on the rear end, really, and tell you to go. And what he was trying to do was space people out so they wouldn't all jump up together. And if he looked at somebody, and he could look at you and tell whether or not you were just hesitating because you were nervous about it, or if you really didn't want to jump. But if you were just hesitating, he would yell, "Go," and slap you on the back. And sometimes that slap was just a little bit more than just telling you it was okay to go. You'd actually step forward a couple of steps, would put you in midair. And but if you got up there and you just flat told him, "No, I don't want to jump," he'd just push you off to one side, and then they'd jump everybody else, and they'd give you another chance. And if you refused to jump, and some people did. I mean, I didn't have anybody in our group. Then they would take you down and you'd wash out and go to your next assignment in the military.
Was your first jump out, was that exhilarating? Was that just...
Well, you're so keyed up for 2 weeks. That's all you've been thinking about. And everything you've been doing has been leading up to that. I mean, it was automatic. You went out the door, you looked up, parachute was okay. You looked around you to make sure there was nobody right on top of you. You picked out where you was going to land. You couldn't steer a whole lot with those little chutes, but pick out where you're going to land. And by that time, you was on the ground. And did you roll? And then you got up and stood around and you thinking, hey, I just jumped out of an airplane. Yeah. And the second one was okay. About the third or fourth time you jumped was when you really looked around and says, okay, I'm getting ready. I'm in the door. I'm going out. You got your head, you tuck your head, but you're still kind of up a little bit. You can see what's going on. You can see the ground. And one thing that I noticed, and after you talk to people, there is absolutely no sensation of falling. And that's what really confuses people. When you go out, you look around and everything that you can see is other jumpers. And they're all the same they're coming down the same speed you are. So you're not falling. You're just looking around at all these people that are stationary. And then you look down and the ground is quite a ways away, but it's slowly coming up to you. But you're not falling down to it. The earth is coming up to you. That's the way it looks because there's no point of reference until you get down, like treetop level or something like that. There's no buildings or anything around you. And so it's that people just can't, I said, there's no sensation of falling. And that really surprises most people. Now, that was for me,
And you said 5 jumps?
Yeah, we did 5 jumps.
All in one day, or did they spread that out?
They one a day for 5 days. And then at the end of it, that's when they give you your wings. Pin your wings on.
Now, let's go back. Then you go back to Bragg.
Yeah, then we went back to Bragg to start up our training, our actual Special Forces training.
And tell me, Special Forces, tell me that story. It started originally in World War II. Talk about that.
Well, the original one, and I still can't remember the name of the movie, but there was a movie that was actually filmed here in Utah, a lot of it. Some of it was down at Fort Bragg. There was some local people that was in it. But it was a group of people that were in the United States Army and a group of people out of Canada. And they formed them up as a special group. And what the intended purpose of them was, that group, once they got trained, they were trained in alpine skiing. They were trained in mountain climbing and a bunch of other stuff. But and I think I got the right name. In Italy, there was called the Gustav line, and that was the one that was there was like 3 or 4 different lines that the Germans had built across the island, and we had pushed them out of one, and they'd just fall back to the next one, and then we'd have to push them out of it. Well, this one was supposed to be the hardest one that was going to take, and they were sending that group of people up the mountain so that they could attack from the rear.
So the original Special Forces was in.
Yeah, that's where that's kind of where we trace it back to. They did a lot of other work with the SAS out of England and French resistance stuff like that too, but it wasn't really designed as the original Special Forces. Right now, the Special Forces consists of 12 men on an A team. That wasn't back then. They were 4 or 5 guys, and it was designed for each. We want you to go in and do this, therefore it'll take these amount of people. They didn't have it all broke out the way they did.
And the Green Beret, give me that little bit, the history of that. You told me that.
Well, they were, from what I've heard on it, is that they were doing a lot of work with the British, which wears berets. They were doing a lot of work with the French resistance, which wears berets. And they didn't want anything to do with the United States Army. So they would wear berets, but they were all unofficial. And after World War II, they were wearing the Green Beret. And every once in a while somebody would see them and say, "That's unauthorized handgear for the military. Take it off, put a regular hat on." And most of them would say, "No." After the guy had left, and they'd tell him no. And so, but they were still wearing it. They were wearing it quite constantly. When President Kennedy came in, he was the one that came out and says the Green Beret is authorized as a military headgear for special forces. And that was the first one that had ever occurred. It really made a lot of people mad. But nobody could go back. Even the Joint Chiefs of Staff couldn't go back because it was
from the president.
The president made a declaration. And if you look at, I told you, sometimes you see pictures of just after President Kennedy was buried, he had the eternal flame, and it was surrounded by white concrete, the flame was. And if you look on a lot of pictures, you'll see down at the bottom, somebody put a Green Beret there. And it was one guy that and I don't remember his name, but he was quite high up in the Green Berets and everything. And he went up there and went to did a salute, took his beret off and laid it down. He says he was returning it because the president was the one that authorized it.
And if you were going to talk about what the mission of the Green Beret or what their ethos is, what would that be? What do they teach you there?
Well, that's the one thing. If you look at most typical Green Berets, especially back at that time, it wasn't, and if you look at me, it wasn't great big guys with huge muscles. That wasn't the thing. We were designed on an A-team basis. The A-team was 12 people. There was 2 officers, and then there was 6 enlisted. The enlisted had, let's see, how am I going to, well, it was 5 enlisted. There was one that was the platoon sergeant or the squad sergeant, actually, at that time. You'd have a medic, you'd have a communications sergeant, you'd have a demolition sergeant, and you'd have a heavy and light weapons sergeant. And so that was the team. Then the other, that was a 12-man team, 2 of each one of those and 2 officers. But then you could take that team and you could split it into A and B. And so you'd have 1 of each on that squad. Our original concept was that we wouldn't go in to actually fight a war. In other words, you wouldn't take special forces and a company or a division or whatever you wanted on them. You wouldn't take them in, okay, you're going to go fight this division of whoever we were fighting at the time. You would go in and, like in Vietnam, you go to a special forces team, a team there, there'd be like 12 Americans. Then there'd be like 200 or 100 or more Vietnamese. And you would split them all up, and each one of you would teach them what they needed to know about heavy light weapons, demolitions, communications, and you'd teach them how to be a platoon or a company or a squad or whatever, and then they would fight. You'd go out with them to fight with them, but it was them that was doing the fight, and that was the concept of special forces, was strictly as a not as they'd have maybe special missions every once in a while, but the majority of them were just strictly there to train indigenous people to fight their own wars.
And you were a communication specialist.
Yeah, I was a communication sergeant.
How did you end up doing that?
I don't know.
Did they just say, "Here you go"?
Yeah, we sat in there, and I remember taking a whole bunch of tests and everything, and yeah, you're going to be communications. Okay. That sounded fun too.
And and they train you in all the parts of it, though, I would assume.
Yeah.
What was your favorite of the trainings? What did you like doing the most?
Probably demolitions. That was the funnest, just to blow stuff up.
Like what? Tell me what would they train you to do?
When I was in there, I went to short courses in the medic as a medic. Then I went to a short course, and I'm saying these are 3 to 4 weeks long. Short courses, heavy light weapons, short courses, demolitions, and then of course I was communications, so I didn't have to go to it. But they would have a lot of stuff in the military, and it was like C4, an explosive, that was right close to being out of date. So if it goes out of date, then they have to take it, and they have to, in that case, they just have to burn it.
You're saying it's like milk in the fridge, it's going to go bad.
Yeah.
It's getting old.
Yeah, it's just getting old.
Yeah.
So they would give that to Special Forces. And Special Forces would just go out in the woods and start blowing stuff up. And I always joke about it. I remember one time we were out there and they had it was a Jeep or else a 3/4 ton truck or something in there. And that was stuff, you'd wrap stuff around it and everything and see what you could blow off. And there was a front wheel on that. So we wrapped stuff around it and we blew the front wheel off. And then somebody got a great idea. And he says, look, he said, we turn this wheel over. C4 comes in quarter pound box. You can cut it to whatever size you want for your application. So we'd cut it and then we'd stick a cap into it, put it underneath, walk away, put the tire on top of it. And then the guy would look at it and he'd say, okay, basically where the hubcap would normally go, that's heads, and where the brake assembly is, that's tails. And then everybody'd make a dollar bet on it, it's going to be heads or tails. And then you'd set it off and then kick up about 10, 15 feet in the air and come down. Oh, it's heads. So again, and we're just trying to get some interest going. Well, it was just about time for lunch, and one sergeant came over and he seen what we were doing. He was just cracking. He's starting to bet too. And he said, we got to get back. You got to get in, for lunch. So he says, how much have you got left? And this guy says, well, we got like 2 quarter-pound packages left. He said, well, put it underneath there.
How big's that? Is that like that?
Yeah, it's,
okay.
5 or 6 inches, And so we stuck them underneath there, put the caps into them and wired them up together, got over there and we blew it. And that thing went up in the air. It looked like it was a bird way up high.
How high do you think it went?
I have no idea. There was nothing to judge it against, And it almost disappeared. But then when stuff gets that high, it always looks like it's going to come down on you. It looks like it's coming straight back down. So we were looking at it, and then everybody runs over. There's only about 5 of us there, and we all run over, 50 feet away and look up again. It's still coming right on top of you. So we're all running in circles trying to figure out where it's going to go. And the one sergeant says, everybody spread out. He said, why? He said, well, I'm going to kill one of you. I don't have all that paperwork because it kills all of you. So we all spread out. Well, when it came down, it was 100 feet away from us. And then he says, okay, don't ever do that again. So we just laughed at it. And
so that's, I guess C4 is pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah.
A little dab will go a long way.
Yeah. The most impressive one was called det cord. And you'd actually use det cord sometimes to set off C4. Det cord wasn't really classified as an explosive, but and don't quote me on this, but it burns at like 600 feet or 1,000 feet a second. To me, it's pretty close to an explosive. But it doesn't actually explode. It just burns very, very fast.
How big a round is it?
Oh, it's the size of your little finger.
Oh, so it's not very big.
No, it's not very big. But they use it for, there's a whole bunch of different uses for it. But one of the uses for it is you can stick it in and it'll blow up C4. So you can stick down, whatever size you want on it. But they came out and they gave us these rolls of it. And I'm talking, those rolls that are 2 or 3 feet in diameter, And they says, you got to blow this up, but you can't blow it up all together. It has to be rolled out. So we're on a military installation. We're not thinking anything, So we put a stick through it, and then we just started walking out through the woods, laying this stuff out. And, and this one sergeant was there. There was 3 groups, and none of us talked to each other. And we all walked out, and so we're walking along the other guy that was with me, I'm walking along, and all of a sudden he stops walking. He says, keep walking. And I kept walking, so I walked around him, and then we looked down, and that encircled a tree. It was about maybe 2 or 3 inches in diameter, pine tree, just tons of pine trees out there. He pulled it tight, and we walked a little bit farther, another tree, and then we seen some trees that were maybe 4 or 5 inches in diameter, and we'd walked around them 2 or 3 times. And finally, we got to the end and walked back to the front. And he says, okay, so we hooked all of them together. And he hooked them up, and we took it over to set off the thing off the battery in the truck. And he set it off, and it's just instantaneous. All 3 of them just immediately blew. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, trees started to fall. And we thought it would just, knock the bark off. It cut the tree right in half.
Wow.
and trees are falling like that. And that sergeant's looking at us, and his eyes are getting bigger and bigger. And he looked at us. Funny, they all stopped falling. He said, everybody get in the truck. We police up everything. We picked everything up. And he says, this forest sits inside of Fort Bragg, but it's a national forest. Pine tree is the national tree of North Carolina. If you cut one down in the national forest, it's a $100 fine. And he says, I don't know how many trees you guys cut down, but so we jumped in the truck and took off out of there. So before anybody found out about it, nobody ever asked us, and we never told anybody.
The weapons, what was your favorite weapon to fire? I guess you had access to a lot.
Yeah, when we went into weapons school, we would go in and you'd walk in first thing in the morning. They'd hand you a weapon, and it could be an AK-47. It could be a Spanish rifle. It could be a British .308. It could be just anything, a Russian, all of their stuff. And it was all the stuff that was being used at that time. And you'd go in and sit down. They'd give you a class on how it done. Then you'd have to tear it apart. You'd have to put it back together again. Then when you could do that, you do that 2 or 3 times. Then they'd take you out to the rifle range, and they'd give you 100 rounds. And you'd fire it through whatever that weapon was, automatic, semi, whatever you could do with it. Bring it back, clean it, put it away, and then give it to the armorer, and he'd check it over. And then he'd put it away. And then in the afternoon, you go eat lunch. And then in the afternoon, you get a different weapon. We just go through 2 weapons a day, just on and on. I mean, the most fun we ever had was 50 caliber. We had a few rifles, not very many of those because they were using those. There wasn't very many in the inventory yet. And I think they were Remingtons. And it was just off the shelf. I mean, it wasn't built specifically for the military. It was just for anybody. But then we had 50 caliber machine guns, and we had to take the guns and we had to build our own belts of ammunition up. So I had your thing and they'd be in short rounds. They'd be like 6 or 7 rounds to a little belt. Then you'd have to hook the belts together. And I think it was every 5th round, maybe every 7th round, I can't remember, was a tracer round. Well, what I did when I got mine is I popped the tracer round off and would hook 5 or 6 of them belts up together. So now I had about 7 or 8 tracer rounds.
All together?
And then I'd hook them all together. And you'd usually do it towards the end of your belt. So you'd be up there firing, and he'd look at you and he'd say, one sergeant would come over and he says, your tracer rounds aren't going off. And I said, oh, don't worry. I can tell where I'm hitting me. Okay, so I just kept firing, because you only fire like in 3 or 4 round groups. And then you can see when they're getting ready to go into the machine, into the thing, because the tips of them are a different color, the bullets. And so I'd fire, okay. And then I'd just hold it down, and it'd just be a solid stream of tracer rounds from the gun all the way out to the target. And he'd come running over and trying to find out what was going on, and then he'd realize what I'd done, and he just laughed. Because, it was just for familiarization, so it didn't really matter, And but that was the funnest. I really enjoyed the rifle itself, the 50 caliber rifle, sniper rifle.
Okay, so at this point, are you hoping they call you up to go to Vietnam?
No, I was smarter than that. I mean, I was dumb enough to jump out of an airplane, but I'm not dumb enough to volunteer to go to war.
So how did it end then there at Bragg?
Well, after like I say, 9.5, 10 months, I graduated. They issued me my beret with a full patch.
Yeah.
And at that time, when you first started, you go through so much training, then they'd issue you your beret. Then you'd go through some more training, and they'd issue you a little bar. It was about, 2 inches wide and a 1/2 inch high. And it would be the same color as your patch. Like 19th was green, a turquoise color. So it would be there. Then after you completed your training so that you were fully qualified, it's called full flash qualified, then they'd give you the full patch. And that's what you see most people wearing. They've got up on their beret, they've got a patch. it'll be like the turquoise patch. The 7th was red. The 5th had a black background and then some stripes through it and things like that. So that's how you get issued it. And a lot of people don't realize that there's actually 3 different, that tells you your amount of training that you had. And so anyway, I got my full flash qualified, and that's when they returned me to National Guard back to Utah.
Yeah. So you went back to the base?
Well, then, yeah, then in the civilian, I went back up there, and they got upset at me because I was in a 2.5-year training program to become an aircraft sheet metal journeyman. And I just spent a year of it, or basically 10 months of it, in learning Army stuff. And so they says, the way the law was written, they couldn't do anything. They said, you just go back in and you'll have to play catch up on your and all and other stuff. And so I went back into there and just got my regular job and did a lot of moving around the base to different places. I went into local manufacturing. I went into the canopy repair shop because that's under sheet metal. I went into stabilator control. I went into center wings. I went over on the line and worked on the line for a little while on the F4 line.
All this was F4 stuff?
Yeah. Well, yeah, basically.
And did you love that plane? Was that fun doing that? Or?
Oh, yeah, it was. I enjoyed it because, well, main thing was I was jumping around from place to place, so I never got bored. I was just learning something.
Yeah.
It was get better. Now, like a local manufacturer, we still had the F-105, the Thud, they called it. And if one of those needed a part, they would come to us, and that's all they do is give you a part number, 10, 15-digit letter part number. You'd have to go over, pull the print out, find out what the material was, go get the material, bring it over, lay it down. They could print it onto the material for you, and then you cut it out and build it.
Oh, you made one?
Yeah, you made one from scratch.
Wow.
And then, because they didn't have any in stock. And then you take it over to the line where they were going to put one aircraft, they were going to put it on, you give it to them, and they'd install it.
From working on them, what was your take on the F4?
It's a good airplane, really good. I mean, the joke is that the F4 solved the single flame out problem because it had 2 engines. So you could still lose an engine and fly it. All the other fighter aircraft only had 1 engine. But it was hard. I mean, it could take damage like you would believe. We get a lot of stuff back from Vietnam, and we got 1 airplane back, and it was sitting in there, and actually on the air intake was where they would paint the red stars for aircraft that they had taken out. And if I remember right, there was 6 red stars painted on that. So that aircraft has shot down 6 Russian aircraft, or MiGs aircraft. That where that intake was right where the co-pilot. It's a weapons officer, but it's a co-pilot was sitting, and the pilot was sitting in front of him. I talked to the pilot that was sitting in that aircraft when it got damaged. He was over North Vietnam. He says all of a sudden he got a flame out, he says they're flying along, no detection. For some reason, he says his radar didn't go off on it. But he says all of a sudden that whole aircraft just shuddered. So it felt like it was coming apart. And he says then it kind of halfway stabilized, but then his left engine was out. And he says, he got this tremendous air rush through the canopy. And he says, but you can't turn around in the canopy and really see. You can look in the rearview mirror, and you can kind of see the weapons officer. He looked back there. There was no weapons officer there. It had ejected. He looked around, and no parachute. He didn't know what happened to him. And he says, and then he's looking over out of his left side and back a little bit, which is kind of awkward to do. And he sees a missile, a SAM missile, and he didn't say what kind it was, but it looked like it was from the damage. It looked like it was maybe a cylinder about 8 inches across, had gone right in front of that left engine intake into the rear seat of the co-pilot or the weapons officer and had ejected him out, and it was still hanging there.
Wow.
And he says, the only thing I can think of is, do I eject? And then he realized, no, I'm over North Vietnam. I'm not going to eject. So he turned around and came back, and he kept flying it down. And he asked him, do you want me to divert to such and such? And still on one engine, still okay. You can still fly okay. So they had him fly all the way back down to Saigon, to Tan Son Nhut. And he says they cleared the runway, and because they didn't know when he touched down, is that missile going to fall out? And he says, I touched down at the end of the runway. It's the most gentle time I've ever touched down. Came to a slowly stop, and then you're supposed to taxi off the runway. And he says, I hit the button, the canopy went up, I jumped out and ran. And he says, and then they came over, and he says, we sat there and watched that thing for hours, trying to decide if that thing was going to go off. They finally tied a rope around it, tied it to the end of a Jeep, about a 500-foot cord, pulled it out of the airplane and hit the ground, didn't explode. Then they boxed the whole aircraft up and sent it back to Hillfield.
Wow.
And we got it and was starting to repair it. And when he found out it was back at Hillfield, he flew in to come over and see it. That's when I met him.
Wow. So still had the hole in it.
Yeah, I still had the whole.
Wow.
And I asked him, he says, never did find out what happened to the co-pilot. Yeah, never. Obviously, from the angle it went in and everything, he says he's surprised that the ejection seat even went out.
Yeah. But, wow.
Yeah.
That's a crazy story.
But we'd get stuff all the time that had come back from Vietnam that was shot up, or especially the wings. We get the wings back a lot that have bullet holes through them and stuff like that we'd have to repair.
Now, you eventually ended up in Vietnam as a contractor.
Yeah.
Tell me that story.
I'd been in the National Guard. I had about 3 months to go before my time was up. And I was planning on staying in. And I worked on it.
What year was this, probably?
This would be 72, right around 72. And I'm sorry to describe it. They have places up there that were called RAM teams, Rapid Area Deployment Teams. And I was on one of those that I could do repair, so I could be sent anywhere in the world to do a repair on an F-4, basically. And they called me up, asked me if I wanted to go to Vietnam on a RAM team over there. And I said, okay. I said, I'd volunteer for it. And then I went down to the National Guard, and I talked to people at Hillfield, or JAG office and a few places like that. And then I went down to the National Guard, and I says, I'm going to go over to Vietnam. I says, I got deployment orders. I says, but I want to be released from the National Guard before I go. And I says, I'll be over in Vietnam for about 2 months when I'm still in the National Guard. And he said, well, you can just go ahead and re-up. And he says, and then when you come back, we'll just start you again. And I says, well, he's got a question to ask you. And I says, I can't get anybody to answer me. He says, what's that? I says, I'm a civilian. I says, I'm going to be in Vietnam wearing civilian clothes, because I won't be in the military. I'll just, I says, and I'm in the National Guard, which means that I'm technically in the military. And I says, now, if I get captured in Vietnam, very slim chance, but if I get captured in Vietnam, can they shoot me because I'm in a war zone, I'm in the military, and I'm not in uniform? Therefore, I'm a spy? And he says, well, I'm pretty sure they can't. I says, no. We're talking about my life. Pretty sure doesn't cut it. I need a definite answer. The Geneva Convention says this. He says, I don't know. And I said, well, go talk to the JAG office at the National Guard. Go talk to the JAG office at Hillfield. Nobody could come up with an answer. I mean, I'm sure they've got one now, but at that time, nobody could come up with an answer on what it was. I said, okay, I'm getting out of the National Guard before I leave. So I got out about 3 months early for my original 6-year stint in it, and went over there.
How did you get over there? How did they fly you over on a?
Yeah, they flew me on a commercial airlines. That's how they fly most of the guys over. Well, we flew from Utah to San Francisco, from San Francisco to Anchorage, Alaska, from Anchorage, Alaska to I think it was in Japan, Okinawa, somewhere in that area. Then from there into Vietnam, and the same thing coming back.
And where were you stationed in Vietnam? Where were you at?
Saigon, Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. Saigon.
And that was is that right? In Saigon or outside Saigon?
Well, it was basically in Saigon.
Was it a huge base?
Oh yeah, it was tremendous. I mean, had a big Air Force base. There was Army contingency. I mean, they had everything on that base.
What was it like when you stepped off the plane in Vietnam? What was your take on it?
We left. It was 4 of us, and when we left the United States, they gave each one of us. They have to give you an advance pay because they don't know what it's going to cost you, or if you're going to be stationed, if you're going to stop someplace and need some money to rent a hotel or whatever.
Right.
So I had about $2,000 in cash on me, and the other 4 guys had it too. And so we're walking around trying to find out. We hadn't picked up our luggage or anything. We knew where it was at, but we was trying to find where we were supposed to take it, trying to find this guy that was supposed to meet us, and we couldn't find it. So we're walking along, and I says, well, here. And so there's a door, and I opened it up, and we walked out, and we're on one of the main streets, and we're walking down the street. And then we couldn't figure a way to get back in. We went back to that door, and it was locked. So we walked down to this place, and I says, we need to get back in there. And he says, well, show me your pass or badge or whatever they'd given us. Like, we haven't got one yet. And he says, well, you had to get one when you went through customs. I said, we didn't go through customs. We're trying to find this guy that's supposed to meet us. Boy, he grabbed a couple of guys and pulled us in. And he says, have you got any money on you? And I said, yeah. Pulled out my wallet, $2,000 and $100 bill. It's illegal to be in Vietnam with American money. You had to have military script because you could get 10 times the value if it was American money.
And no one had told you that before?
No, because we hadn't gone through customs. That was all the orientation thing. And he says, well, how did you get out? And so I took the one captain that was in charge of the detachment. I walked him back down, and I said, see that door right there? And he says, yeah. I says, you just open it and walk out. And he says, no, that sets off an alarm if you do that. And I walked over and grabbed the door and opened it up. No alarm went off. Nothing happened. So then he got way upset because now it's his fault. Anyway, they took us back and processed us through the door that we normally should be in. Nice accommodations. It was had a single room all to myself. We'd every day you'd get up, take your clothes, and they give you 2 pair of boots to wear. You take your clothes and your boots, set them on the end of your bed. Then you'd leave for the day. When you come back, your clothes were all washed, all ironed, hung up in your closet, and your boots were polished.
Every single day?
Every single day, except on Sunday. They don't do anything on Sunday. And there was a little maid that was assigned to each one of them. And so I talked to her because we didn't know. And so I talked to her about it. She says, yeah, I had to pay her $10 a month. I had to buy her a can of shoe polish, a box of soap, and that's what I had. That's what you had to do. That's what you'd pay her. And so,
wow.
And you had everything.
That's a good deal.
Oh yeah. And I'd buy. They had these great big tins of Ritz crackers. And they had them in a metal tin so they wouldn't get soggy. And I was up there one time, and my room just happened to be close to where her little area was where she kept all of her stuff. And she had a little boy with her that was probably 4 or 5 at that time. And he was looking in my door because I keep my door open a lot. And he was looking in my door, and I was eating those Ritz crackers and reading. And I looked over at him, and he could just tell he wanted one, but he didn't dare say anything. And so I motioned him to come over, gave him some crackers. I gave him a whole handful of them. About 2 minutes later, his mom came running back in with those crackers, and she set them down on my thing. She said, he wasn't supposed to take these. I says, no, I gave them to him. She says, did he ask for them? And I says, no, I could tell he wanted one. She says, oh, he just loves these, but he never can get them, and they're too expensive for them to buy. So that can was about 3/4 the way full. And so I just took the whole can and gave it to the kid. And she looked at me, and I says, hey, she says, well, we'll go home and take the crackers out and bring the can back. And I says, what for? She says, oh, everybody wants those cans to put stuff in. I said, I don't want it. You can have it. So she took it, and so from then on, about every 6 weeks or so, I'd buy another can of them and give them to him. But so the room didn't cost us anything, and we could eat and everything at the NCO club. And let's see, the most expensive thing you could get at the NCO club was steak, and I don't know, a good-sized steak, a baked potato, a separate bowl of salad, and whatever vegetable you wanted. And then for dessert, they'd give you, take an 8-inch pie and cut it in fourths and give you a fourth of it. And then they'd give you, and it was always hot, and then they'd give you a little cup of ice cream so that you could put that on your, when you got ready to eat it. And that came to $5.
Wow. So you were living like a king over there.
And everything was taken care of. It was really nice.
And you said you were 6 days on, 6 and 7.
Oh, yeah.
What was what did you do day to day work wise?
Well, we'd just get up in the morning. There'd be a truck waiting for us after breakfast at the NCO club. Then we'd go out to the flight line, and then we'd go into one building, and then they'd tell you what your assignment was for that day. And I mean, sometimes they'd tell you, well, you got to go at this aircraft, and you'll be there until it's fixed. And
was it just F4s, or were you working on everything?
Never did work on an F4 while I was over there. But they would, we would work 6 days, 6 hour, 10 hours a day, 6 days 1 week, and then 7 days the next week. We got every other Sunday off. Pay-wise, it was great. I got $300, something like that, per diem. And that was, I didn't have to pay for my room, and I didn't have to pay that. That was all that. Wow. Then I got, let's see, $300 a month for per diem. Then I got my overtime, which was, I had to figure it out, but it was like 40 hours, every two weeks, And then I got hazardous duty pay, which was like 25% of my base pay for every day I was in country. And I think that was all I got. I was, all my overtime, all my hazardous duty pay and all that I was married at the time, that was all being sent home to my wife. And I kept the $300 a month. And I got a BX catalog where you could get all stuff just super cheap. And I was sending that, buying stuff like mad, sending it home.
It's like Amazon before Amazon.
Oh, yeah. It was a lot better than Amazon price-wise. And I just have that all shipped home.
Was there, were they lobbing, was there occasional artillery landing on the base, or did you see any of that kind of thing happen, or was that rare?
We didn't see anything where they actually tried to attack Saigon. This was before the Tet Offensive and all that, but it was right about that time. But we didn't get involved in any of that. They had a Navy contingent there that was flying a A6, A10 Sky Raider or something like that, and it was close air support. And we would go over to them to eat our lunch because they had a little place set up, and we'd watch them take off. They'd armor aircraft right outside of where we were eating, then they'd take off. And when we first got there, started doing that, they would take off, like 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, and around 10, 11, they'd fly back. And they'd be gone that long. And we'd been there for about 2 months, and they were taking off and going out, dropping their bombs, and we'd be back, and it'd take them about 45 minutes. So that's how close the enemy was getting to us.
Wow.
And I talked to the one pilot about it, and he says, "Do you see those mountains over there?" And I says, "Yeah." And he says, "We're dropping," and they weren't that far away. He says, we're dropping our bombs just on the other side of that mountain. And there was nothing between that mountain and us. It was just perfectly flat. And he says, yeah, they keep getting closer and closer. But I never, you hear people getting attacked and all that downtown and, things going on. I never did get anywhere near that. I never had any trouble at all.
And tell me some of the experiences. You told me you were working on the Prime Minister. Is it what?
Well, I guess the president.
Yeah,
South
tell me about
Vietnam.
that.
He had I'm sure it was a 124 aircraft, and it was decked out. I mean, it had all mahogany on the insides, plates, and it was locked up. Always, we had to get into it. But what they were doing was the aircraft had tanks in its wings, and it also had tanks in its belly, and none of them were explosion proofed. And so if you fired a round, it would immediately punch a hole in it and start leaking gas. And if your next round was tracer round, it would ignite it. And sometimes if it hit a piece of metal, a piece of steel in there, it would ignite it right then. So they wanted to explosion-proof those. We were explosion-proofed, I think, most of the Air Force ones. And he wanted his explosion-proofed. And so it was okay. So we went over to do it. We had all the equipment and everything that we needed there. And we're sitting there looking, and there's, hundreds of Vietnamese Air Force personnel on that base right there with us doing stuff. And we says, why don't you just have some of your own guys do it, And the one Air Force guy says, he doesn't trust his own people. He says he wants Americans to do it. And I found out later on that they even had the air crew that kept that aircraft flying. That was all American civilians, and most of them were based out of Texas, doing all the air crew, refueling it, inspecting it, and doing all that stuff. It was pretty, it was a lot. I didn't really get involved in it, but there was a lot of sabotage going on base from different people doing different things.
Like what? Give me an example of that.
Well, there was one that they liked to do that, and I think it was more out of the area, but you'd have all your hydraulic lines in, when it was a normal thing, just sitting on the ground, the engine running even, your hydraulic lines weren't pressurized. They were maybe 300 pounds pressure. Well, the Kong found out that you can take a hydraulic line, and if you drill the right size hole in that hydraulic line, it won't really leak because there's not enough pressure to push it out. So you can go along and drill like a dozen of them in the line, and nobody will ever see them. And then when it gets up and he goes out on the end of the runway and starts to rev it up and starts to putting the pressure to it, then it will start to leak, but just real fine pinholes. So you don't see anything. Then the plane will take off and it'll start to fly towards North Vietnam or wherever it's going to do its interdiction. And then all of a sudden he loses all of his hydraulics. So now he can't put his landing gear down. He can't deploy stuff. So, so it takes out an airplane. They finally figured out that's what it was. So that's when they stopped letting certain people work in certain areas.
Wow.
So, and there's other stuff like that goes on, all the time. There's a whole bunch of ways you can sabotage an airplane, and basically the pilot won't even know it. And then there's other ways. You just do it so that as soon as somebody hits the ignition on that thing, it'll blow up, But, I worked on the 124. Then we worked on a C-119. I was telling that one we had two C-119s that were gunships, so they had the Gatling guns in them. And from what I understood, this was after it happened quite a while, but one of them, the tail number was like 119. The other tail number was 911. And they had a Vietnamese guy that was running the ground control, and he was getting confused. He was brand new, and he was getting confused. And when you're running through the revetments where the planes are parked, you can't really see anything and so he's had the one. So 119 was supposed to go down this certain road between the revetments and make a left turn, and 911 was supposed to come the opposite way, or the right angles to him, and he was supposed to make a left turn. Well, he got him mixed up, and he told the 119 to make a right turn and then the 911 to make a left turn. They turned into each other. And the plane, the one that we were repairing, the propeller on the propeller on the other plane started to chop into the nose of the 119. And there is nothing up there. There's no radar. There's nothing. It's just sheet metal. And the propeller was within about a foot of where the pilot has his feet on his rudder control. And they said that when that occurred, I guess he must have pulled the brake to stop it or something. But he said the pilot and the co-pilot in the 119, they were two Air Force guys. They had to hunt to find out where they were at because they had jumped up and ran to the back of the airplane, jumped out, and they were gone.
They saw what was going to happen.
But yeah, because if it would have gone very much farther, it probably, and the aircraft is all loaded up with ammunition and everything. So,
now, you said reventments. Does that mean walls? Is that to keep people from shooting at planes or something, or what is that?
Well, it's a lot of stuff. The revetment is, 10, 12 feet thick. It's got metal on both sides and dirt in the middle. And it surrounds an airplane on three sides.
Oh, okay.
And then, so what it is, and then they don't face each other, they offset. So if they drop in a mortar round and it comes in and hits the plane, it'll blow that plane up. And that plane, fully armed and everything, but it won't blow up anything else. It'll all be contained within that one revetment.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but you can't see anywhere.
Right.
That's the other thing.
Right.
And then I worked on an A-37, what it was called, Dragonfly. It's a little observation airplane, and the pilot and the co-pilot sit side by side. It's kind of an unusual looking thing. And it was the old one guy had shot one round into that plane. It went up, it hit a wing, part of the wing, went out. But when it hit the wing, took a chip out of the main wing, took out a hydraulic line, and took out an electrical bundle. Just one bullet. And luckily the pilot hadn't retracted his landing gear when it happened, so it was fairly close to base. He just flipped a U-turn airspace and came back and landed. And that one bullet probably, I'll bet by the time you got done with it, it cost $50,000.
Wow.
To do all the repairs and get the parts and everything in it, all that. And then we was working on OV-10s, which is an observation craft, single pilot in there. And it has one propeller in the front of the plane that pulls and one propeller in the back of the plane that pushes. And it's got kind of like a boom on the tail end of it. As on both wings, it's got rocket pods, but the rockets are just colored, dye. It just blows up. And
oh, I see, like
green,
smoke?
Blue. Yeah, smoke grenade.
Yeah.
And that's all he's got. And the joke was that the OV-10 armament is the pilot wears an Army 45 on his hip. That's the armament that he carries. So if he wants to shoot back, he just opens the window and starts firing his pistol. But he says they'd been over there for just a short time, and he says, and all of a sudden, nobody would shoot at those guys. Well, what they found out was going on was the guy would take off, the OV-10 pilot, the Air Force guy would take off, and then a couple of F-4s would come in, and they'd be up around 4,000 or 5,000 feet, just so it was hard to see them and you couldn't hear them. And then the pilot would fly down low, and he would try and find stuff. So, okay, here's a contingency. I can see a whole bunch of guys here that are obviously South or North Vietnam, or here's a truck or something else. And then what he would do is he would radio the guys upstairs, I'm at such and such a coordinate, start your dive, and they'd start diving down. And then he'd go over and fire one of those rocket things down, smoke grenades, and they'd blow up, and then he'd say, drop on red, and they'd come down and drop a 500-pound bomb. And so the ones that survived realized that, every time we shoot at that OV-10, what the pilot in the OV-10 would do is he'd be flying along, and all of a sudden he'd get a couple of shots that would go up through his wing. And he'd look around, oh, I can see them, they're over on that hill. So he'd just turn around until the guys start, and he'd fire a rocket right close to him, and they'd drop a 500-pound bomb on him. And if they survived, they'd tell their friends, don't shoot at those planes, because if you do, they drop bombs. So nobody would drop a bomb. You know, they just got, you could fly pretty much unmolested all you wanted, you know.
Well, it sounds like you were busy over there.
Oh, yeah, they kept us busy.
And you enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah. It was fun. Like I say, Sunday we'd go downtown Saigon and walk around and meet people. And
were they pretty friendly to Americans?
Yeah, real friendly. Yeah.
And you were there 4 months?
Yeah, about 4 months.
Okay. You came back?
Yep. One other plane.
Yeah, well, yeah.
One other plane I got to tell you about. I was sitting there. I was working on I remember aircraft I was working on, and this guy came up and he says, what's your thing? I says, aircraft sheet metal. He says, okay. He says, what's your security clearance? And I says, well, I happen to have a top secret. But, he says, how come? And I said, well, it's a combination of was in the Army and back and forth, and I had to have all this stuff. And he says, but right now it's a top secret clearance. And he goes, oh, okay. He says, anybody else got that? And I said, not that I know of. So they hunted around. They found another guy that had a secret clearance. So they said, okay, you two guys pick up this stuff and come with me. So we went down this revetment, very inward revetment. And here's a C-47. Now, a C-47 was the aircraft in World War II that they dropped the paratroopers in on D-Day.
Wow.
It was an old plane.
Wow, yeah.
So he says, and the plane, the wing had bolts that joined the outer wing to the inner wing, had bolts going through it, and they were parallel with the thing. Well, apparently they had been up like Da Nang or someplace up north, and they took some route. I think they were probably weren't even in Vietnam. They were probably in Laos, across the border, Cambodia or someplace like that, where we weren't there.
Weren't supposed to be, yeah.
Well, they were supposed to be, but we weren't telling anybody that we were supposed to be. So they flew back and landed, and then they hurriedly got a new wing for it, slapped it on, got it bolted on, and the guys took off, and they started to fly in, and they were going somewhere else, not Saigon. They were going to another country to land. And he said, all of a sudden, we thought somebody was shooting at us again. But we're down over South Vietnam, And he says, and they started looking, and they started checking out. Well, when the guys had put the plane together, these bolts, they hadn't put them in right. And so they were shearing in half, and half of it was flying over and hitting the fuselage. And it sounded like people were shooting at. We slowed down, slow as we could go, dropped down to a nice altitude that wouldn't impact us, and they landed it. And so then they wanted somebody to come in and repair it so they could fly it out. And I'm sitting there looking at the two guys. I said, so who are you? And he said, well, I'm the pilot. And they're both in civilian clothes. And okay, Air America, CIA. So I says, okay. So we went in, we had to take the bolts out, replace them all, and do all this kind of stuff. And then I says, okay, now I need to get into the cockpit. And he says, what for? And I said, I got to go in there to rig the controls up. And he says, I can't let you into the cockpit. Can't let you into the airplane. And I says, okay. I says, when you guys take off, do you fly north or south to take off? He goes, what difference? I says, where do you fly? He says, we fly to the south. I said, oh, okay. I don't need to get in the cockpit. He says, no, wait a minute. Why? And I says, well, I live, my room is on kind of the north end of the airport, the Tan Son Nhut. I says, if you was going to fly to the north to take off, then I didn't want to be in my room. And he says, why? And I says, because when you get in that plane and take off and you pull the stick back so that you can go up, you may go down, you may go to the left, you may go to the right, it may stall. I don't know what it's going to do. Well, why? I says, because you won't let me in the cockpit to rig it. He says, come back tomorrow. So I came back the next day, and they had a Connex, they call them, this big metal, like a metal box that sits on the back of the truck. And they had gone in there that night and stripped everything out of the plane and put it in that box. They had 2 armed guards on it. So we unlocked it, got in, and as I walked in, I'm sitting there looking, and there's the whole floorboard. There's nothing, it's just straight metal. But there's 6 holes about 4 inches square that go all the way through the airplane and out the bottom. I don't know what it was. And I walked up to the front, and I says, okay. And I says, I need the series number of the aircraft, like a C-47 A, B, C, D, whatever it is. And he says, I can't tell you that. I said, okay, you guys still taking off to the south? He looked at it and said, okay, just a second. He went back, got a manual, and brought it up to me. So we went through, and then the other guy went on the outside, and we went through the whole check mark and got it all done. And I said something about Air America, and he says, I don't belong to Air America. And I says, you're flying a military aircraft in civilian clothes? Yeah, you do. I said, don't worry about it, And he started laughing, and he said, I guess it is kind of obvious, isn't it? I said, yeah. He says, what do you guys do? And he says, won't tell you. And he would not tell us, and we never did find out what it was.
What did you think it was? No idea.
I mean, at first I thought it was like an observation, but those guys don't do that kind of observation. Then I thought, well, maybe they have those in and they drop pamphlets through them, for dispersal. But they don't do that much.
It's pretty wild.
And I thought, well, it probably is something, I'm wild guessing, they may be flying it over Cambodia and Laos and stuff like that, and they have infrared sensors in those holes and different spectrum sensors, so they can fly over it and read what's under the ground, under the canopy and stuff like that. I don't know, but yeah.
You never did know what it was.
No.
They flew away, and that was it. That's a good story.
They flew to the south, and I didn't worry about it after that. So, yeah, that was most of the aircraft that we worked on. Like I say, I never did work on an F-4.
Wow. Okay, so you came back home.
Yeah, came back home, and let's see, came back, and then I didn't immediately go down to join back up again. I just wanted some time, to spare. And I was working with a guy up to Hillfield, and he says, well, you're wasting your time. Why don't you join the National Guard, reserve up here to Hillfield? So I says, okay. So I went in and told him what I was. I got my certificate for being a journeyman, this and this and this. And I, when I got out of the Army, I was an E6, Staff Sergeant, Air Force, it'd be a Master Sergeant. And he says, well, I don't know if we can give you the same grade. And I said, well, that's no problem. If you can't, then I'll just go back to the Army. So they played around with it. They finally, okay. So I started to go into those, and I was over there. And they says, wait, you've got to go to this class on sheet metal repair. And I says, I'm already certified for it. And he says, well, a company commander says you have to go through our classes. Okay, so this was the opening. So I went over to the class, and the guy that was the instructor was a guy that I was teaching as a civilian.
Wow.
Sheet metal.
Wow, yeah.
And he's my instructor.
Yeah.
So he's my instructor, but military rank, I outrank him by 2 grades. And so he's sitting there, and he'd be going along and saying something, and then he'd stop and turn to me and he said, "Was that right?" And yeah. Or else, what about this? And I'd explain to him what to tell the people. And I went back to the guy and says, hey, I did that for about 2 drills. Finally says, this is stupid. I don't care. Your commander says you got to do it. I said, okay. So I resigned, got out. And
Give me some water.
Yeah. And so then I was, let's see, I can't remember. I think I stayed out for another part of the year. And then another guy says, well, why don't you come to my unit? And I said, what's it? He says, 145th military, 145th, what they have? Howitzers, 105.
Yeah, the 105, yep.
He says, that's what we do. But he says, I'm in a different thing. I'm in a unit that, a little company, and when the 105s deploy, then we sit out in front of them, and a red-eye missile, it's a little shoulder-held missile, and it'll shoots down airplanes. And he says, and that's what we do. We have a bunch of these. And he says, I've got an opening for you. And so I went down and applied for it. And they accepted me, kept me at my rank and everything like that. And then my first...
this is 73 now, probably? What year would this be?
Yeah, well, not probably about 75, 74.
Okay, so, yeah, okay.
It's been a couple of years. I've been in the Air Force Reserves. And then...
Okay.
And so... Anyway, for the first camp, they sent me down to Fort Bliss, Arizona, and I went through the school on how to shoot that missile down. So now I'm shooting down the airplanes that I'm repairing.
What'd you call it? Where'd you call it?
It was called a red eye.
A red eye.
Yeah, they've got.
Describe that. How big was that?
A bazooka.
Okay.
It looks like a bazooka with a little bit bigger front end. It's about the same size.
And what's the specs on it? Tell me about it.
Oh, well, it only fires about, I think the charge on it was, I'm guessing now, it's been a while, it's like a 2-pound charge. That's all it is. But it's a heat-seeking. So what it does, if you fire it right, it will go up and it will fly into the engine from the exhaust side and explode in the engine and take the plane out.
What was its range? How far away?
Well, yeah, it had to be fairly close. But I mean, we laughed. We caused a whole bunch of excitement. We had one that was a dummy that was just a training route. We didn't think anything of it. We were sitting Washington Terrace, which is on one side of the valley, and then Hillfield's on the other side. And it's just not very big. I don't know what it is, maybe 5-10 miles away. And so we would go out there, and we one day we got there. They finally gave us one to practice with. We went out there and put the batteries up in it, and the F4s would be taken off from Hillfield going, if they was going north, the only time we could do it is when they're going north. Then we could sight in on them, and you know, and it would come up and beep and everything, and then you have to elevate it a little bit, and then you pull the trigger, and supposedly you got it.
Does it? You wait till it locks on to it senses the heat?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it tells you it's within range and everything, and then it gives you a different tone, and then you elevate it up higher.
You're going to give it some, yeah.
And you elevate it up, and then you fire it, and supposedly if you follow that exactly, then the airplane, and we'd also get them when they were coming into land. Now, one day, and we did this for a couple, 3 months. Nobody ever said anything to us. All of a sudden, we get these frantic phone calls from Hillfield and everything. Well, one guy had mistakenly, and I don't know if he was taking off or was landing, but he turned on his radar, and it tells him if somebody's tracking him to fire a missile at him. And it was picking ours up. And somebody thought we were getting ready to shoot him down. And those guys were all excited. They didn't know who it was. And they were frantically going around, and finally somebody said something. Somebody tied it in somehow. I don't know what it was, but they called us up. You can't do that anymore. So what we had to do was we could still track it. What we'd have to do is wait until it was an aircraft that didn't have that radar built in.
Were you the only one that knew that which planes had the radar in them? Or
well,
how would you know?
F4s. I mean, we would track like if it was a C-130 taken off from the field, then we could track that, and we could even. It was hard, but we could get if it was a little civilian aircraft.
Really, it would do that.
Yeah, it was real hard because those they turned just a little bit. They'd lose contact. Never could pick up commercial airlines because they were too high flying over Ogden to Salt Lake.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you'd look up and just look at it, okay. And I think we even tracked some of the helicopters who were flying in and out because they just don't worry about it. But somebody says, well, why didn't you just tell the pilots to ignore that? You know, if you happen to leave it on by mistake, then just ignore it. And they said they didn't want the pilots to get in the habit of ignoring that sound warning.
Yeah. And
they didn't want to turn it, you know. And so they said it's easier to turn off the National Guard than it is to turn off the pilots. And so we did that. Anyway, and then that was going along pretty good. And then all of a sudden I realized I'm not going to go any higher. So I got out of that and went back into the 19th. The guy from the 19th called me up and they was trying to get a team that was, everyone was Special Forces qualified, not just partially, but full qualified. They needed a radio operator.
Yeah.
So I went back to work for them, and I went back down to them, and I was actually deployed on an A-team then. All that. And it was, I was flying back from North Carolina on one deployment, and we were going to jump out at Hill Air Force Base on a Armed Forces Day. So I'm sitting there, I got my rucksack on, I got my radio in my rucksack. I mean, I got to have 80 pounds on that backpack. I had an M16 rifle. I mean, everybody was fully suited up.
Is this just a train?
Yeah. And they flew us over the runway, and it was flying, I think it was flying a 119. The 119 is really bad because it gets on a downdraft. You jump out, if you got guys jumping out the right and the left side, if you're not careful, you can actually come underneath the airplane and hit each other. So they told the guys were supposed to be really careful about, okay, one guy goes out on one side, guy goes out on the other side, and they stagger them back and forth. Well, jump masters got mixed up. And so I went out, and the guy went out on the other side, and he was the same thing. Well, he went out just a little before me. So when he went down, I came in on top of him, and I hit his parachute, and then we got tangled up a little bit. So you work your way down. So both parachutes are about halfway collapsed, but you're still coming a little bit faster, but it's not a big deal. I mean, and we couldn't get undone from each other. And so you get down where you're looking right at him. You've got your hands on his suit, and he's got his hands on yours. You just pull each other right up close, best of friends. And then what you do is you wait until you're just before you hit the ground. You're 30 feet in the air maybe. And then both of you just push away from each other as hard as you can, and you swing away a little bit. Then you hit the ground separate. That's the way it's supposed to work. So I'm going down, I'm looking over his shoulder at the ground, and the ground is 100 feet away. And he's looking at me. He wasn't really looking. I think he's fairly new. And so anyway, we get closer and closer and closer, and all of a sudden, so now I'm about 40 feet off the ground maybe. And so I pulled him in and like that, and all of a sudden his eyes just got huge, and I couldn't figure out why. And so both of us pushed away, and just as we pushed away, I hit the ground. And I'm sitting there looking, and I can still see I'm 30 feet off the ground. And I hit the ground going backwards. And he went out, and then what it is, on one side of Hillfield, there's a big berm there.
Oh.
I hit right on the edge of it. And he couldn't see over my shoulder. I think I was up a little bit higher than he couldn't really see, and I'm looking down on the other side of him. So I hit, and then I rolled off the berm. The parachute pulled me off, and I went down, and I'm started getting up, and geez, okay, my back was killing me. So I popped off my chute and everything, and rolled over and laid there. And then all of a sudden, I hear the siren, and here comes an ambulance across the thing, and it's just, there's got to be 100 feet of sand there where we was at. And it stopped way over. I mean, it stopped me 2 football field lengths away from me. These guys jumped out, and they ran over, and I think it was 4 of them, and they put down the stretcher, and he says, "What is it?" I said, "I think it's something on my back." I said, "I just can't stand up." I said, "If I sit here for a while, it may be okay." "No, that's okay." Roll over, and they put me on the thing, and then the other 2 guys took my parachute and my backpack and everything, and they started carrying it. And these 2 guys picked up the stretcher and started to go on, and I'm sitting there. I look up, and they're both just, this is like August, just
you're sweating,
and they're about ready to pass out. I'm thinking, boy, I'm not. Now I'm going to have to carry 4 guys off this. And I said, "Just set me down. I think I can walk." I was probably halfway there. I said, "I can probably walk if one of you just help me walk." And he says, "Look over there." He says, "You see that place where all those people are sitting?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, that's my company commander sitting there. That's the base commander sitting there. That's the ALC commander sitting there. We are not going to put you down and watch the Army guy walk away. We're going to carry you the whole way no matter what happens." So they carried me over and put me on. Took me down to the VA hospital. I broke my back in 2 places.
Wow.
And so then I couldn't, a bunch of other stuff went on. But anyway, I finally got back up and I did a whole bunch of stuff. And I actually mostly I stayed at home and just stayed and laid it like I was in traction.
How long to recover from that injury?
Oh, well, I recovered from it. And then I waited for another 6 months or so. I was actually still in the Guard. So they'd released me. They didn't release me from the Guard. They just kept me on active duty. And I stayed there. And then I started coming back to the drills and everything was going fine. And they says, okay, we're going to put you, and I got permission from the doctors to start jumping again. And they says, we'll take you back to Fort Bragg when we go back there on this next deployment, and they'll test you. And I says, okay. So we all loaded up onto this plane, and we started flying along, and then there's one loadmaster, the guy that's over the plane, came back and he said, okay, everybody suit up, we're getting close to where we're going. We had all of our equipment on a pallet that we were going to push out the plane. What we were supposed to do is put everything on the pallet, sort of push it out. All the guys would jump out over the drop zone, and then the plane would land, and then I'd get out, and then the plane would take off and go up to New York. And the guy says, we're not landing. I says, so what happens? And he said, well, when you get to New York, try and find somebody who'll drive you back down here. So I told that to the sergeant major, and he went up and talked to everybody, and it was all a mix-up. So he says, well, we're going to have to recertify you. And I says, what? He says, you get up on this platform that's about 3 feet off the ground in the middle of the aircraft. Everybody's laughing their heads off. He said, okay, now jump off and hit the ground and roll. So I jumped off and hit the ground and rolled. He said, do it again. So I did it. Okay. So he pulled out his paperwork, and he had it, and he signed the document. And then he called one of the majors that was on the A-team over, and he signed it. So I was going to jump that time. So I got my parachute out, and it's a night jump. And we had to jump with our equipment. So I put, first time in 2 years, I put my...
You got all that 80 pounds of gear on?
Yeah. So we get there, and it's, they were flying along, and we all go out. There's 12 of us went out. And all of a sudden, we're looking around, and you can actually talk to people. Somebody's yelling, drop zone. Nobody could find it. You can look down, and it's white sand down there, and then you can see these trees in it. And that's all we could see. And somebody says, way over to the north, way over to the north. We all looked over, and we could see this black area. Well, that must be the drop zone. So everybody's trying to get to it, and it's way far off. We can't get to it. And later on, we found out it was a lake. So we're lucky we didn't get to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm sitting there. Okay, this is my first jump, 2 years, and I'm going to hit trees. So I know I'm going to be dead, So I get all set up, and I actually could feel myself going through the branches, hitting the branches, and I'm still going. And then all of a sudden, nothing. I'm just sitting there. I didn't touch the ground. I didn't feel anything, and I'm just sitting there. And it's so dark. Now I'm down in these trees, and it's so dark I can't even see the ground. And so I'm getting nervous about what in front. I thought, well, okay, one of the ways you can do it is you can you take off your helmet, and then you toss it, and then see how long it takes to hit the ground. So if you have to do your parachute and climb down. So I take off my helmet, thud. As soon as I let go of it, it hit the ground. It's gone. So I undo my parachute and start to climb down, because you can climb down about 4 or 5 feet on just your straps. And I get all set so I can edge around and turn around and start to go. And I'm about maybe 2.5 feet off the ground.
It's that dark.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so then I'm sitting there, so I can't get the parachute out of the trees because it's completely out there. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I can hear somebody yelling. And so I grab my rucksack and my other stuff and start to walk towards him, and I come to a road. So I put my rucksack down on the side of the road, walk through the road, and on the other side, and it's a guy, broken leg. that was in my stick that I was jumping off of. And then we could hear more people. Well, long story short, I finally seen some red lights flashing, and it was an ambulance, and I went over and got them and brought them back to where we were at. And out of the 12 guys that jumped, I was the only one that walked off the drop zone on my own power. Now, a bunch of those guys, they got the wind knocked out of them and stuff like that. So they'd help them out, and they'd help them walk out, and then they were okay the next day. But we ended up with like 2 broken legs. One guy had a concussion. He'd hit the ground, okay, and he started to roll, and there was a great big log laying there, and he hit his head against the log.
Gosh.
A bunch of strains and stuff like that, and they were laughing. And so the next day when we all got together again, and somebody says, well, all we got to do is make sure that from now on, nobody jumps for 2 years before we come into a guy had picked out the wrong drop zone. And he had dropped us in over trees.
Oh, my
It was a rough terrain drop.
And the guy with the broken back was the one that walked out unscathed.
And I didn't have any trouble with it. I didn't have any trouble. Later on, I messed up my knees, skiing accident and stuff like that, and I tore the ACL out. So I had to get out, and store that.
Did you not? Now, you went another time to a combat zone, or no? Or you only did the one?
No, that was Vietnam.
Okay, Vietnam.
Now, and the other one I always laugh at is I went to another combat zone, and that's Korea. And if you don't believe it's a combat zone, go up and talk to the guys that are sitting on the DMZ. It's a combat zone.
Now, what year did you go there?
Hey,
In the 70s then?
Probably in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was in the reserves for about another 4 or 5 years. And we went over there on a 2-week.
To Korea.
To Korea.
Yeah.
We went over there to train with the Korean Special Forces.
Oh, how was that?
That was fun.
I heard the South Korean forces were very hardcore.
Yeah. They took us in, and what they did is our A team went in, and they had their A team, and then they, like I said, you can split it into 2 squads of 6 men each. And so they take ours over, and then we'd take one of their squads over, and so that would make a full A team, 12. And then the other 2 would gather together. So we had 6 Americans, 6 Koreans on the thing. So I had and you matched up. So I was communications. Which one of you guys is communications? And they spoke broken English.
Yeah.
We'd just sit there and work back and forth. And what was interesting was there's a unit here in Utah that's a linguist unit. And they went in there and they found about 4 or 5 guys, I think it was, maybe more, that spoke Korean.
Oh, wow.
All been on their mission there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And so he was with us. And so we would be talking. If we got to a point where we couldn't understand something, we'd yell at him, and he'd just talk to the Korean guy. What is it? And the Korean guy would say it, and then he'd just tell us what the answer was, stuff like that. And he'd intermix with a lot of it. But,
so you said that was a combat zone. Was it pretty tense over there? Talk about that.
Yeah, a lot of the time. I mean, we'd be up there, and you never hear about this, but, we'd be up there, and we were deployed right close to
the border.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were probably still 5 miles away, or not more. But you'd always, people would come in. Yeah, we caught 2 or 3 people a week ago, or we had firefight with some people that were coming in from North Vietnam or North Korea.
North Korea. Wow.
He says they're infiltrating all the time, trying to get more information about different things that are going on, and so there's a lot of that's going on up there, and those guys were fairly tense.
Yeah.
I mean, they get back towards Seoul, and that's not a big deal. It's normal, but when you get deployed out there, right on there, I mean, that's, that was a war that never ended.
Yeah.
And then later on in my career, after I'd got out of the aircraft maintenance side, I went down to the white-collar workers, what I call them, used to desk jobs and stuff like that, and I was doing a bunch of different jobs.
This is still at Hill.
Still at Hillfield.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got out of the guard by that time, and but the first time I was working in a It's called photo recon, and it's when we had the F-4s that were reconnaissance aircraft, had big cameras in them, and I was working on some of that stuff. And they sent me over to Saudi Arabia, and this was before the first war, the first Gulf War.
Okay.
And the Air Force had pretty much got out of reconnaissance. They were using film-based reconnaissance. They weren't using that so much anymore.
Was it digital? Is that what they were doing, or was it more satellite stuff?
Everything. They were trying all kinds of different stuff. But they had some aircraft that were still dedicated, but they were film-based, but they were still dedicated. But they'd cut it down to probably a tenth of what it used to be.
Yeah.
And but the Saudis still had an RF-5 aircraft, they called it. And it was a real small single made by the Air Force. I don't think ever used them, except for maybe some simulated combat things. But so I went over there with was 4 or 5 of us, and we sat down with them because the U.S. Air Force wanted to use their photo imagery on some of the stuff. So we sat down and they had kept it up pretty good, but not really. It was, it wasn't flashy. It wasn't a fighter aircraft, so they ignored it.
Right.
And so we brought it back up to speed. We had the processors would actually develop the film, and then they could make the pictures out of it. And then we set up a way that they could send those pictures to the Air Force if we needed them and stuff like that.
How many cameras would be in a plane? Multiple?
Well, there'd be, let's see, most of them are just like an F-4 would have one camera that looked to the right, one camera that looked to the left, and one camera that looked down.
So like this?
Yeah.
Angled out?
So they'd have like 3 of them in there.
How big a frame?
Well,
big?
Okay, it gets into a bunch of stuff on it. The one that the Air Force, the best camera that they had was, the focal length on a camera, regular camera, was like 2 inches or 3 inches from the lens to the film. The one on that one was 87 inches. But they did it by mirrors.
Oh, so it didn't stick out.
It wasn't a big camera this way, but it was a huge camera. I don't think one guy could lift it, with its mount and everything. But it was considered an 87-inch, KS-87, 87-inch focal length. Then they had other ones that were smaller. Then they had some that were...
How big was the negative? Was it big?
Yeah. That's the ones we were making. The ones I showed you some pictures.
Yeah, those are just...
We'll show some up. Yeah. I'll show you some more in there. But yeah, and it's a lot of resolution.
A lot of resolution.
Yeah.
Wow.
When we were doing it, even those of us that were on the technical end to keep it running, we didn't even know what the resolution was. They wouldn't tell us.
So was the second, in the F-4, was the guy in the back pulling the trigger, or was the pilot on the camera?
Good question. I don't know.
And how many frames would you come out with on a roll of film? I would assume a lot.
Yeah. It was interesting. The biggest problem they had on that was the shutter, opening and closing to take pictures. One guy finally came up with an idea, and he says, look, why don't you just take the shutter out and throw it away, not even use the shutter? And he says, but what you do is you fly the aircraft, you predetermine your thing, so you're going to fly it at 1,000 feet off the ground, so you set all your apertures and everything for 1,000-foot distance. Yeah. Then the pilot flies it at a certain speed. What you do is you turn the camera on. When you get ready, you want to start taking the pictures, you turn it on, and the film starts to go through the camera. And it takes pictures onto the film, but the camera doesn't open and close, the film moves.
Wow.
And so you're actually taking...
So that's what they did?
Yeah, so that's what they did. Then they had one that was... one that they could fly that it had a trapezoid, a triangle piece of thing in there, and it would rotate. And every time it rotated, the camera would hit one of the things, and then it would shut it down, and then it'd rotate to the next one. The film would move, and this is going hundreds.
Oh, it's kind of like a film camera, like a motion picture camera.
Yeah, but it's going faster.
Who made the cameras? Was that Kodak? Or?
I think Kodak did a lot of them. I don't know if exactly.
Man, the tech involved in that is crazy.
Yeah. It's
How many years did you work with that stuff?
probably about 5 years.
Wow.
And then I went into simulators. And while I was in simulators, so now the Gulf War had occurred and all this other stuff. Then when I was in simulators, between the two Gulf Wars, they sent me back again, but I was in simulators at this time. So we went over and we were going to upgrade
Into Saudi Arabia?
into
again?
Saudi Arabia. We were going to upgrade their simulators. And it was so that they had, we'd sold them all these missiles and all these bombs back when. Of course, now we've gone through iterations and they don't have it. They don't have the simulators to, now you're going to do different things. So we went in and upgraded their simulators. And I mean, we was there for 2 months, and it was just, you'd sit there in the cockpit of the simulator and one guy would be on the outside. And then you had books of checklists. Flip this switch to off. You flip it off. Read this off the screen. Okay, now flip this switch to down.
Wow.
Now flip this switch to up. Now, and read each one of these screens. And you have to flip every switch in that cockpit, and it's just full of them. And you'd have to switch two at once. And that was just to verify the computer.
What was the plane? It was a
F-16.
F-16.
Yeah.
And were they kind of motion simulators? It was mostly just inside the cockpit with digital stuff or something?
Well, the ones that we were doing was just standalone. And it was basically, it wasn't to teach them how to fly, it was teach them how to flip switches.
Okay.
So in other words, if you're going to fly this and you're going to drop this bomb, this is what you do. You flip this switch to here, to here, to here, to here, and then this will come up on the screen, and then you do this, and then you hit the button and drop it.
So you could have flown a plane. Did you know enough? You don't think so?
I flew an F-16 simulator once.
And were you any good?
Well, let me put it this way. When I got out, the guy that was in charge of it, I was up here to Hillfield, and he says, congratulations. He says, I'm going to give you this pin. And it was a little pin, and it was a pin that certified that you had flown into a 9G, so 9 times the force of gravity. You're only supposed to get them when you do it in a real airplane. He said, I'm going to give you this. And I says, okay, why? And he started laughing. He says, because when you were flying that simulator, did you notice that the color it didn't dark, but it just kind of went kind of a grayish color? And I says, yeah. And he says, well, that means that you were below ground level. And he says, you're the first pilot that I've ever had that's been able to pull 9 Gs 250 feet below ground. That's how bad I was. I mean, I took that thing and dove it right straight into the ground, trying to come in for a landing, and went 250 feet below ground before I could pull it out. So they gave me a bad time over that for a long time.
So you're retired now.
Yeah.
Did you retire from Hill?
Yeah.
Was simulators the last stuff you did there?
No, they actually, I got done with simulators. I went back to I went to foreign military sales for a little while, just getting some stuff caught up. And then they put me in, each group of people up to Hillfield has got a certain, like a 346 means you're a logistics officer, 2010 means you're an item manager, 1670 means you're an equipment specialist. Well, they put me over one of those groupings, and it was people that were doing modifications to the aircraft, and I was the base handling them for make sure they got their training they needed and make sure all that stuff was going on. I did that for about 2 years, and no, I don't want to do this for a living either. So I retired, and I've been retired for 15, 20 years now.
Wow.
And I retired, I think I had 40 years in.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of stories, my friend.
Yeah.
Those are good ones.
So we had fun up there.
Now tell me, honor flight.
Okay, when honor flight, and I get it wrong, my wife should be here to explain that. When a gentleman from Australia was starting to do what eventually evolved into honor flight. So then my wife moved. She was with him, helping him on these flights, and we did a few flights with him. Then they got honor flight involved in it, and my wife took that over, and she was, whatever you call it, head chairman around here. for Utah Honor Flight, and other people were working with her.
So, so you were involved kind of when that started then.
Yeah. Well, I was just on the sideline smiling.
And explain to somebody who doesn't know what Honor Flight is. Tell them what that is.
Well, Honor Flight, the way I understand Honor Flight first started was somebody back east was a pilot, but just a civilian pilot. And he found out that there was people, and I don't know exactly where, like I say, I wish I knew, but
That's okay.
that he would take one or two guys or something like that and put them in his airplane and fly them down to Washington, D.C., and then he'd rent a car and they'd drive around Washington and see the sights and see the memorials. And most of them had never been to the memorials and stuff like that. Bring them back. And then later on, you get some more people. And then it kept getting bigger. And then people from out here wanted to do it. Well, out here, they had to fly back. And they'd fly back on one day and spend 2 days there and then fly back. And it just got bigger and bigger. And then, exploded nationwide. And that's kind of where my wife was getting involved in it. And I couldn't even tell you where the headquarters is now.
Yeah.
But she got involved in it that way. So she would get people to donate to go. We were doing all kinds of donations to get people to donate it. And then people that'd be the person, the vet, and mostly it was World War II vets when we started. That was the big push, was to get World War II vets back there, and they would, and then there would be somebody with them, a guardian. Now, most of the time, they would try and get the guardian to be a relative.
Yeah, a son or
and stuff like that. And I don't know if they ever most of the time they wouldn't let the wives go. They'd let them go, but they wouldn't let them be the guardian because it's hard, because you're supposed to be able to take care of this person. Well, if you're the same age.
Yeah, they're not easy.
So they don't, I know they don't do it now. They won't let your wife, or I understand anyway, they won't let the wife be the guardian. But so you pick them up here, you give them, and I mean, they've had grand send-offs. We used to do it out of Salt Lake at the Air National Guard there on charter flights and stuff like that. And the governor would come and talk to them, and all kinds of different, base generals would come and talk to him.
Yeah.
Generals from the National Guard would come and talk to him and everything, and would fly them back. And they'd go to the World War II Memorial, which 90% of them had never seen before in their life. I was seeing pictures of it. Would take them to the Air Force Museum, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Iwo Jima Memorial, the Marine Memorial, and that now I know they're taking them down to I think it's the Naval.
In Baltimore.
Baltimore and all that.
Yeah.
So they keep changing it, but I mean, basically, you go to the World War II Memorial. Well, in the World War II, is you got the memorial, then you've got the Korean. You got the Vietnam Memorial and all those, and so most of them were World War II. I went back a couple of times it was one of those where we got one guy that's going back, and his guardian just had a heart attack, and and we're leaving tomorrow morning at 6:00, and this is like 9:00 at night, and so my wife would throw me a little duffel bag and
you were the volunteer.
Pair of pants and a shirt and 2 pair of socks, and I was gone the next morning, and then we'd just go back and and stuff like that. So I went back a couple of times, and then I went back as a Vietnam vet too, and my son went with me on that one. But it's really nice. The vet doesn't cost him anything. Everything is donated for him. The guardian pays their way. We had a lot of them that went back with a daughter, and stuff like that too. And there have been some really interesting stories.
It's a cool thing to see.
Yeah.
It really is.
I don't know if it was my wife or my daughter who was telling about 2 guys that were on the plane, and they did different things to get them to talk and all that. And the one guy was saying something about it, and he says, well, was you on whatever it was, Iwo Jima? Yeah, I was there. I was such and such. What Marine Division were you at? Well, there was all this back. The one guy reaches in and pulls out his wallet and opens it up, and it's a picture of them.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Sitting there, and he says, "I always carry this because I was so upset when you died."
Wow.
And he says, "Well, I got wounded and we evac'd out." And he says, "Yeah, and the word that we got back was that you died." And so he thought he'd been dead all this time. So this is 40 years later?
Wow.
They're sitting next to each other on the plane.
Wow.
And there's been a lot of instances where people have been able to tie in with other people that are on the thing. It was really interesting.
So looking back, what's your take on your whole military experience?
Everybody should do it at least once. I mean, it gives you a new outlook. It makes you, I think, a little more understand. I mean, I always knew that the people in World War II, my dad was a vet, I always knew that they did things, that, I don't know how to describe it. You knew that they did stuff and had to sacrifice to do it. But, and they'll always tell you about their drill sergeants and about all this that they had to do and everything. But, until you've actually gone in there and done it, you don't really understand what you're talking about. Now, I didn't have to make any huge sacrifices, but, I had a few drill sergeants that made me make a few sacrifices, and it just makes you feel better about the country. You can understand where people are coming from when they, different things, and Vietnam was very hard on the soldiers because World War II, they all returned to the parades. Everybody was happy to see them and all that. Vietnam, there wasn't a parade that I know of, Those people, came back and people would meet them down there at the airport in San Francisco and, oh, you went over there and killed babies. You went over there and did this and all that kind of stuff, and that's, just, I don't want to do anything, and a lot of them would just go to the nearest store they could find, buy a nice pair of Levi's, nice shirt, another pair of shoes, take everything off, throw it in the garbage, and go home.
Yeah.
Dressed as a civilian.
Yeah.
And never say anything. Yeah. And I think that's why they had so much, and mental difficulties are a hard word to put on it, but I think that's why a lot of people had problems trying to adjust back into civilian life because they didn't want to tell anybody what they'd been doing for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's a shame because they were doing what they were told to do.
Yeah.
And they were, and you can argue that we shouldn't have been there. You can argue that it didn't make any difference and all that. But still, the government said, this is what we're going to do. And if you didn't like what they said, they should have been voted out of office.
Yeah.
But
I feel like, though, the Vietnam guys are getting their dues now.
People are coming around more and more to say, and I think people are understanding that it wasn't something necessarily that they wanted to do, but it was something that they were told to do, and they stepped up and did it.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, appreciate
you coming in.
Yeah.
Great stories.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you.